Hey, what's up guys, welcome to another Reddit stories video, and today I've gathered for you a few very unsettling ones. So as always, make sure you're somewhere comfortable and let's get into them already.
The Thing in the Woods Took Another Kid. Submitted by Bathroom Heavy 9782.
I tried to tell him it was a mistake to reopen. I told them what I saw all those years ago, but they didn't believe me then. So what would they now? Camp Soleil, changing the name for obvious reasons, is a camp in a small town that was made for rich, troubled kids. The kid keeps leaving flaming bags of shit on the neighbor's porch. Send them to Camp Soleil. Well, they will make crafts and become little angels. Sounds like bullshit, right? It is. They come to camp and clean commodes and run until they are so miserable they don't feel like being the little devils they were. The camp is very hush-hush, only locals really know about. They get campers through the wealthy and well-connected, sharing info with each other. Rarely they will accept locals. That's how I wound up there 11 years ago. My parents never really loved me. They mainly just tolerated me. That is, until I started acting out by throwing bricks through windows and robbing stores when I was 12. My dad grew up with the police chief, which kept me out of juvie, but the chief recommended I go to summer camp. Parents were happy to get rid of me. We were dirt poor, so I can only assume my mom blew the camp director to secure me a spot. I was glad though. I would have done anything to get away from the yelling and fighting that kept me awake most nights. I soon wished I was back home. As soon as the bus stopped, we ran up the trail that stretched on for what had to be a mile while carrying all of our belongings. We stopped and got sorted to cabins, and then began washing our dorms and showers with toothbrushes and sponges. At dinner, I made friends with Devon. His parents were in the entertainment industry, producers or writers or something. He was funny and kind. Devon didn't belong there. His relationship with his parents was similar to mine, except he never really talked to them at all. He was mainly raised by his nanny, Susie, whom he loved like a mother. He only got sent there because his parents wanted to send him to a camp and some of the rich friends recommended this one. I hope they rot in hell for that. Camp was like this most days. Run, clean, cook, eat, sleep, repeat. Saturdays were free though. They pretty much let us do whatever without any observation. Davon and I were like glue, inseparable. We would explore the woods and began to notice strange things. We would hear people talking but never see them. We'd find what would look like bones and sticks making ornaments in trees. I know this sounds like a cliche horror, but we honestly thought it was other campers playing pranks. Until the night Davon died. We went exploring that Saturday as usual when we heard the voices. We decided we would prank the pranksters this time. The hunters becoming the hunted, as Devon put it. So we followed the voices, which were so faint and whispery that we couldn't make out what they were saying clearly. We reached the clearing and suddenly it seemed as though the voices were all around us. Devon wanted to run. I should have listened to him, but I still hadn't had the badass mentality that Camp Soleil was trying to break inside of me. I thought if it was little rich pricks playing a joke, Devon and I could whip all their asses. Then the whispers became clearer. They were saying, "Come here, little one," and "Feed the lost one," and "Break them." There was more, but I can't remember. I was getting pretty freaked out at this point. Then we heard something crashing towards us through the woods. I listened to Devon this time. Ran through the woods, but now the voices were following, getting louder. Their voices. They sounded like my parents, telling me they hated me, that I was a mistake. I was crying. It's things I knew they felt, but they had never told me. Suddenly I was grabbed and Devon was trying to get me to climb a tree. He was following, but I was slow. I couldn't collect myself enough to climb faster. I was a gutless, blubbering coward. The voices were getting closer and Devon told me to keep climbing. He dropped down and ran and hid under a fallen tree. The voices got closer and closer until it all stopped. I sat there for what was probably 30 minutes quietly crying and looking around for what was chasing us. Devon stayed under the tree. As I slowly began to collect myself, I looked around and saw that we were by the lake. It was nearly dark, and the lake was about a 5-minute walk from the cabins. I tried to whisper shout at Devon that we needed to leave. He slowly came out and looked around, started to climb down the tree and I froze. "Devon?" called a female voice. "Susie, is that you?" Devon replied. I tried to tell him to hush and hide, but the voice was growing louder. Dave and honey, stay where you are. I've come to take you home. They said you were a lost one. I have a home for you. There was something chasing us. I was so scared. I want to go home. Davon responded through tears. I should have been brave. I should have stopped him, grabbed him and ran. Something, but I was paralyzed by my fear. What came out of the woods was a 7 feet tall, slender, with slimy gray skin in some places, fur in others, and human hair in yet other places. Its limbs were disproportionate and long, one arm ending in a stump and the other in a large hand with razor-sharp nails. Its head sprouted the antlers of a deer and the horns of a bull. It was beautiful and ugly. I was drawn to it and terrified all at once. Davon just stood there smiling. I missed you so much, Susie, he said as he rushed to hug the creature. The beautiful voice turned to a rasp similar to a fork on a plate as it screamed, Welcome home, lost one, before effortlessly lifting my friend in the air and ripping his torso from his legs. The last thing I saw before falling from the tree was the creature lifting Davon's poor lifeless body to its mouth. Then everything turned black. They said I got lost in the woods and got concussed. There was no evidence of what I saw, and Davon simply got separated and was still missing. I tried to tell them that I couldn't have been lost right by the lake, but it didn't matter. They wouldn't listen. Davon's parents suddenly cared. Not enough for them to want it to be national news that the child was missing, but enough to want the camp shut down. My research and found kids have been going missing around here every so often for decades. The number spiked once Camp Soleil opened and dropped after it closed. Someone is hiding something. How has none of this made headlines? I know that thing took that kid. This time I'm doing something. Tonight, as Devon would say, the hunter becomes the hunted. I'm so sorry, Devon. I miss you.
The Sleepwalkers of Camp Moonsong, submitted by Erusius.
All I wanted when I was a kid was to go to summer camp. Every summer, I would beg my parents to send me, but they always said the same thing. It's too expensive, or it's too far away, or we can't afford to drive out there when you get homesick. I know summer camps have fallen out of popularity these days, but they were just about the coolest thing to a kid in the early 90s. Every show had a summer camp episode. There were movies with summer camps. There was even music videos on MTV about summer camps, for God's sake. I felt like I was missing out a big part of my childhood experience by not being allowed to go. But every year I was forced to sit at home and wish. So when Mom told me she had found a summer camp for me when I was 11, I was ecstatic. Camp Moonsong was an all-girls camp about an hour from our house, and the fee for the 60-day stay was surprisingly low. Low enough to make Mom suspicious that it was some sort of front for a sweatshop or something, and she read over the paperwork very carefully with my dad. I remember just hovering outside the kitchen as they went over it, Dad not showing her level of dedication as he held paperwork in one hand and smoked with the other. They talk about not being responsible for injuries or accidents in this stuff. I remember her sighing when Dad scoffed. They're just being careful, Wendy. It sounds perfect, honestly. She's been begging to go to one for years, and if you don't send her before she's 13, I think she'll miss her chance. 12 is usually the cutoff for this kind of things. They discussed it for a while, and when they finally came and said I could go, I was overjoyed. I had my bags packed before the last week of school was even out, and on the second day of summer vacation, my mom and dad drove me to camp for drop-off. It was beautiful, one of those camps like you see on TV. In the middle of the woods, with a bunch of little cabins next to a lake, and I could see a boathouse, hiking trails, archery courses, and all kinds of things that I was chomping at the bit to go try. We met the head counselor at the main cabin, a smiling blonde lady named Gladys, and after some hugs and checking over my stuff, my parents headed out, and I was shown to the Sparrow cabin where I would be staying for the next 60 days. That's where I met Lauren, Sandy, Heather, and Claire, the girls who would be my cabin mates. Sandy and Heather were 12, and this was their first time at Moonsong, but not at a sleepaway camp. Lauren was 10, and she had never been to camp either, so this was a first for both of us. Claire, however, had been coming here for about 3 years, and she was the only one of us who didn't look excited. She was trying to put on a brave face in front of us, clearly not wanting to spook us, but her mood was absolutely off. Claire was also our cabin captain, so when the loudspeaker came on, welcoming us and telling us to meet at the pavilion for orientation, she led the way. The pavilion was more like a small amphitheater, a stone stage with rows of concrete seats leading up and out of it. We took a seat in a section near the stage, all of us chatting animatedly, except for Claire, as the other cabins assembled. Each cabin had 5 girls, and there were 6 cabins in all: sparrow, magpie, grouse, dove, hawk, and crow. They had spread out a little, giving each cabin room to gather, and as we all sat chattering, the camp counselors arrived to start the summer orientation. "Welcome, campers," said Gladys, her voice echoing off the stone benches, "and welcome to another exciting year at Camp Moonsong." There were a few adults on the stage, and she introduced them as the activity directors. There was a counselor for swimming, canoeing, archery, hiking, nature studies, physical challenges, and arts and crafts. This told us how our daily schedules would be posted on the bulletin boards outside our cabins at first light, and that each day would end with a marshmallow roast around the fire pit. "And don't forget, the fire pit is where we choose the night sleepwalker," she said, something that brought nothing but polite claps from some of the campers. I saw more than a few of them that looked like Claire when she said it, and I realized there might be something a little strange at work here. Our first activity was archery, so Claire took us back to the cabin so we could get ready. "So what's with the sleepwalker thing?" I asked, Heather chiming in as well as Claire went to get a shirt that was a little more comfy. "Oh, it's nothing," she said, stripping out her polo and sleeping on a t-shirt. "It's just something that Camp Moonsong does. It doesn't mean anything. It's just tradition." "Oh, what do you mean?" I asked, the 4 of us falling in behind her as we headed for the range. She made a frustrated noise, rounding on us angrily. "Just don't worry about it. If you're lucky, it won't be a problem anyway. There are 30 of us. The chances are good that a few of you might never have to see it." She said the last more to herself than anything. "See what?" I asked, but she ignored me as we came to the archery course. We had archery, arts and crafts, and a trip to the lake that day, and by the time the sun set and the bonfire sprung to life, I found I had quite forgotten about the sleepwalker. We spent a while roasting and eating marshmallows, singing songs, telling spooky stories, and then I saw Gladys step close to the fire with a box that rattled slightly. Some of the girls looked at it ominously, Claire among them, but Gladys was all smiles. "Okay, campers, it's time to pick tonight's sleepwalker. You returning campers know how it works. If you reach into the box and draw the black ball, you are tonight's sleepwalker." I snorted, not quite sure why this had some of them so worried. What? Were they going to come and scare us in Olaf cabin if one of us drew the black ball? Would you have to scare people? What was this, I wondered, because it all seemed kind of ridiculous. The box had barely gone through 5 people before a girl about 8 got the black ball. It was clearly her first time here because she seemed pleased but mystified as she handed Gladys the ball. Gladys asked her what her name was and then announced that Brenda was Summer's first sleepwalker. After that, we all went back to our cabins, even Brenda, and I remember sitting up a little with the other new girls and whispering about how silly it all was. Were they trying to scare us or something? "Ooh, sleepwalkers," we all said as we laughed. But when Claire told us to go sleep, she said something that took the starch out of our sheets. "Wait till tomorrow morning, then we'll see if you still think it's so funny." She was right. The bugle woke us up the next morning and we all shuffled to breakfast in the mess hall. Amidst the chomp of cereal, toast, eggs and bacon, I heard someone sniffing loudly. It wasn't a normal sniffling, like the kind you get from someone who's homesick. This was different. I didn't have words for it yet. I do now that I've grown up a little. It's the hopeless kind of sniffling from someone who's lost something that can't get back, like a mother or a wife crying for a husband or a child. I glanced over to the crowd table and saw that it was Brenda. She looked terrible, like she hadn't slept at all, and the circles under her eyes looked like bruises. She wasn't eating, despite how the girls in her cabin tried to coax her, and her eyes seemed to weep constantly. The crowd table was next to ours, and she seemed to be telling them, in between sobs, that she wanted to go home. They were trying to talk her out of it, saying that the chances were low that she would draw it again, and after a few days she would forget all about what she'd seen. I didn't know exactly what to make of it then, but I would learn. For the next week and a half, I watched as different girls drew the black ball. The ones who had been here before took it better than the new ones. The new ones were always in tears the next day. Because of how the schedules were set up, we didn't really have a lot of interaction with other cabins. We lived with the girls in our cabin, but outside of meals and the fire pit, we didn't see others during the day. Most of them stuck pretty close to their group during periods and in between activities, and none of them wanted to talk about what was going on if you asked them. About a week and a half after Brenda drew the ball, Heather drew out the jet black sphere, and was the night sleepwalker. I remember the look on her face when she drew it out, the look of uncertainty and fear, and Gladys named her the sleepwalker of the night. She went back to Sparrow Cabin, seeming unsure of what to expect, and as we got ready for bed, we all watched her a little apprehensively. So Heather asked, "What happens now? Do I start walking or something? Do they come and get me in the night?" "Maybe they're going to make you disappear," Lauren said, and we all laughed nervously. "Just go to sleep," Claire said, and it shut us all up as we looked at her. It won't happen till then. She slid under her blanket and slid a pillow over her head. So we all settled in, turning the lamp off and nestling down for sleep. Heather was soon snoring, as was Lauren, and I yawned as I drifted off as well. I guessed if something was going to happen, then it would happen. And before I knew it, I was dreaming about swimming and friendship bracelets and all the other things I was going to do tomorrow. I woke up in the middle of the night, filled with a need to pee worse than anything I'd ever felt. I was coming back from the latrine, almost back in bed, when I glanced at Heather and saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Heather's mouth was open in a silent O of a scream. Her hands were bunched up in the covers, and she was writhing slowly on the sheets of her small bed. Her eyes were closed, shut tight like they might be locked that way, and she sucked in breath like she might be screaming in whatever dream she was having. I woke the others, showing them what was happening, and when Sandy reached over to shake her, Clara grabbed her by the wrist. "It won't do any good, and it could make it worse. You just have to let her get over it on her own." "But we can't just leave her like this. She's in pain," Sandy said. "She could be in more pain if you try to wake her up. She'll come out of this at dawn, so just let her be." We went back to bed, none of us but Claire sleeping, and when the sun came up, Heather came awake shaking like someone who's been badly startled. She looked around like something might be after her, like this might all be a dream too, and when we came to comfort her, she began to sob. Her eyes had the same dark circles that I'd seen on other girls, and she walked to chow when the bugle sounded like a zombie. She didn't eat breakfast, and when I asked her what she dreamed about, Claire shot me a nasty look. "We don't talk about it. The worst thing you can do is make them relieve it. But if you know what happens when you're the sleepwalker, if you're lucky," Claire said, talking over me as my voice rose, "you'll never find out what it is." "No," Heather said. "No, I want to talk about it." Claire got a pained look. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I know what it's like. It's not something you should have to relieve." "Wait," I said, putting something together that I should have a while ago. "You knew this was going to happen and you didn't warn us. Why didn't you say something?" "Because it wouldn't have done any good," Claire said. "Knowing it's coming doesn't make it any easier. It's terrible, no matter if it's the first time or the fifth. I got chosen twice last year. The knowing doesn't matter. It's terrible every time." "Do you want to know or not?" Heather said, turning to us angrily. "Because I'm only going to tell it once, and then I never want to talk about it again." We said we did, and she got a faraway look as she began. "I was in the woods. It was night, and everything was dark. Then I felt something watching me, something like a tiger or a bear or something. It was big, whatever it was, because it roared. It shook all the trees around me. I started running through the woods as fast as I could. You see, I was in bed, but my legs ache and my arms feel like pine needles that slashed at them. I ran and ran and ran, but it never seemed to catch me. It was always just out of sight, just out of reach, and the farther I ran, the more afraid I got. After a while, I felt like I might be going crazy. I was so scared, so absolutely terrified, and it just never ended. Then, just as the sun came up, I heard it roar, and I heard the trees rustle as it jumped. I fell down and something heavy hit me. Then I woke up, and you guys were standing there looking at me." She started crying then, and Claire gave her a hug as she assured her it was over and she was safe now. Needless to say, Heather decided to stay in when we saw it it was our turn to hike today. She had spent a whole night in the woods and saw no reason to spend another hour looking at nature. That's how it went that summer. Every night we drew balls from the box. Every night it was some girl's turn to spend it in a state of terror. Sandy got her turn, Laura too, and even Claire had to suffer it one night. But never me. Some of the girls went twice, but I seemed to be immune to the black ball. It never chose me, and if it hadn't been for the team challenge I would never have experienced it. Team challenge was Gladys's idea, and she was clearly pretty proud of it. The last week of camp, and I had almost thought I would get away without having to be the sleepwalker. We were gathering for the morning meeting after breakfast, and all of us assembled in the amphitheater. Gladys stood up there smiling, like she had a big surprise for us, and I suppose she was right. Good morning, campers. This week I have something special planned. Today we start the team challenges. 2 cabins will face each other in 3 events: archery, canoe races, and obstacle course. The winners will be immune to sleepwalking for that night. The losing cabin, however, will all have to be the sleepwalker that night. No one cheered, but we all knew the stakes. The way it shook out was that for 3 days the cabins would compete. On the 4th day, one of them would get the bye and the other 2 would face off. On the 5th day, the last 2 would go ahead to crown the best cabin. Saturday would be the color war and then pick up. Claire took us aside and told us we had to win this. Everyone in this cabin has been the sleepwalker at least once. Well, almost all of us, she said, looking at me jealously. I didn't feel good about it. Quite the contrary, I felt terrible. Heather had been the sleepwalker twice now, Sandy too, and I hadn't been picked once. I didn't want to either. I had watched them go for it and it looked miserable. As it happened though, I had one of the best time on the obstacle course and I was one of the better campers on the archery ring. I felt we had a good chance of winning this thing, and the girls agreed as we started making a game plan. The Sparrows beat the Crows on Tuesday, and then we got the bye on Thursday. We were hopeful we could win this thing, and the incentive was on full display. The losing teams showed up to breakfast with bags under their eyes, shaking noticeably as they refused to eat. Whatever was going on, it was even worse in a group, and we prepared to win against the Hawks and take the whole contest. We had them at archery, but they smoked us at canoe race. We were certain we could whip them on the obstacle course, but then disaster struck. As Claire came across the final leg of the course, having gone last so I could go first and give us a strong start, she slipped and fell off the beam, the race going to her opponent. The Hawks won, and we would be the sleepwalkers that night. We fought it, trying to stay up as late as we could, trying to stay up all night, but we were just so tired. By 11, we were all dozing, and by midnight, we had lost the fight. I remember blinking owlishly as I watched Claire drift off fitfully, and when I opened my eyes, I was in the forest. We were all in the forest, looking around as we awoke into some kind of strange shared dream. I was just trying to orient myself when I heard the roar that Heather had described, and it galvanized me in a way that nothing ever had. It was like a bear's roar mixed with something feline and something much deeper. I imagined it was a Tyrannosaurus Rex sounded like, the scream of some extinct creature come back to life, and I started running. They were with me in the beginning, all of us neck in neck as we fled into the woods. It was always behind us, stomping through the trees like it was as tall as a redwood. It crashed, it rumbled, and as we ran for our lives, it menaced us from the darkness. Heather was the first to fall. I looked back, meaning to help her, but the darkness swirled up and took her. Her tear-streaked, terrified face was there one moment, and then suddenly she was swallowed by the gloom. Laura fell next, stumbled as she looked back at Heather, and I didn't look back to see her get gobbled up too. I kept running, kept showing my heels, and when Sandy fell too, I didn't even notice right away. I was in a state of panic, something I would later call a heightened terror response when I went to college to study psychology. It was similar to the response prey animals have when they are fleeing for their lives, the kind of thing that gets them eaten by a pack hunter when another one pops up on the side while they're focused on the threat behind them. I ran and ran and ran, my legs pumping and my heart racing. I don't know when Claire fell, or if even she did, but I felt the branches that reached out to slow me down, the rocks that battered my bare feet. I felt every mile that I ran, and I felt every horrifying stumble as I nearly lost my balance. I kept running for my life, and when the sun came up At long last, I didn't stop. I heard it spring, heard it come up from behind like a tidal wave. But if it hit me, I didn't know. I came awake, like I meant to fight off an attacker, and the other girls were around me, looking as bad, if not worse. We lost the color war. All of us were too tired to focus. Mom commented on the bruises under my eyes when she came to pick me up, but I just hugged her and said how glad I was to see her. I never spoke about that summer. Not until I wrote my senior thesis on the difference between irrational and rational fear in adolescence. I didn't think I would ever visit those memories again. Not until today. I've been working as a psychiatrist since I graduated, helping kids get over their trauma and trying to find them some relief. Mostly it is normal stuff, divorcing parents or concerns about school and friends. We talk about monsters in closets or stories that won't go away when they close their eyes, typical kid stuffs. But sometimes I help them tell a parent about someone who is doing something they shouldn't so that person can go somewhere where they can hurt them again. Those are the good days. The days I feel like I've made a difference. When the girl started telling me about the dreams, the ones she'd had after her mother said they had enrolled her in camp again, I felt myself beginning to hyperventilate. Described dreams of something big chasing her through the woods at night, about dreams that only came when she was at camp, and only when she was the sleepwalker. I didn't even feel it at first when the pen snapped in my hand, and when the girl said, her voice panning, that I was bleeding, I looked down to see my hand had the jagged end of a pen buried in it. I told her mother that she might want to find another summer camp this year, not voicing what I actually believed so I didn't sound crazy. The mother seemed concerned, but Jenny loves Camp Moonsong. She's gone every year since she was 9. I strongly recommended she find her daughter another camp, and the two left, mollified, with a prescription refill. I had never imagined the place was still open, never in my wildest dreams. I sat in my office, trying to control the shakes as my hand frothed like an infected tooth. I'm too afraid to go to sleep at night, something I haven't been afraid of since that first week home from camp. I'm afraid I might wake up in the woods again, fleeing from the thing that chases the sleepwalkers. The sleepwalkers of Camp Moonsong.
Someone or something is pretending to be a cat on my front porch at night. Submitted by community_booty.
I have been living in rural Ohio for about the last year. Since moving in with my husband, I have become what some would call the crazy cat lady of our neighborhood. It's not that I have a lot of cats. It's that I feed and befriend every stray I come across. Living in the country means you are surrounded by wildlife. Deer, mice, skunks, rats, bats, raccoons, possums, and, you guessed it, cats. Humans are terrible creatures sometimes. They have a habit of taking in animals they can handle, then quickly changing their minds when things get too hard. When that happens in the city, most people drop their new pets off at a local shelter. Here in the country, they just throw them outside. If those unloved furballs aren't fixed, they team up and make more of themselves. If I had to guess, our small town alone has about 50 strays. I would guess I had made friends with around 15 of them in the past year. I leave food on my front and back porch for them every night. I brush the more friendly ones, and I've even kidnapped a few for a day to take them in for vaccines. I can't adopt them all, but I want to try and make a life a little less hard for all these guys. Lately, something strange has been happening though. I have a tendency to stay up late. My husband started working the night shift about a year ago, and it's hard to get used to sleeping in an empty bed. Since we moved for his job, I have developed a case of separation insomnia. I only really sleep well on his days off. I work the average 7 to 3 shift. When I get home, I try to clean the house, tend to our pets, indoor and outdoor, and make dinner/breakfast for him to eat before work. During this time, my husband Jake is fast asleep. He sleeps just fine without me, lucky bastard. Sometimes I nap with him after I make dinner, and he wakes up around 9 p.m. to get ready for work. Once he's gone, I tend to just turn on the TV and game to pass the time until I have to get myself ready for work. Jake and I pass like ships in the night. It's hard to manage sometimes, but we are working toward buying the house we are currently renting. After this past week though, I hope he can be convinced to relocate. About 6 days ago, I was in the living room watching a show about hoarding when I heard something big dragging across our porch. It was around 11 p.m. and Jake had literally only been at work for an hour at this point. Sounds on our porch weren't unusual. There was a cat buffet out there, but whatever had made this sounded bigger than a cat. Its weight was closer to that of a dog or even a person. I paused the television and waited in the silence for it to happen again. My dog Bella slept soundly at my feet. Nothing happened. Our front door leads straight into our living room. There are two huge windows that never seem to be completely covered by the curtains, and our couch sits right below those windows. I try to arrange the curtains to the part of the window that isn't covered is as farthest away from my face. If I'm lying on the couch, it's nearest to my feet. I picked out one of the windows on the porch and saw absolutely nothing there, so I simply pressed play and kept watching my shows. When the sun came up, nothing was unusual, except the cat food was completely untouched. The bowl on the back porch was empty like I expected. Nothing happened for a few days. Honestly, I had kind of forgotten about the sounds until 2 nights ago. This time the dragging happened around 2 a.m. I was actually upstairs in our bedroom when I heard it this time. Our bedroom windows is right above the porch, and I was shocked to realize I could hear this sound from all the way upstairs. It was far too heavy to be a cat. I muted the TV and listened, slightly nervous. My dog was in bed next to me listening as well. The dragging continued. It was like someone was dragging their shoes across the wooden porch. Bella started to growl. It was a low, throaty sound I had never heard her make before. The fact that my dog was upset by this made me nervous. I couldn't call Jake until he went on break at 3 a.m. Not knowing what else to really do, I got up from the bed and walked quietly to the window. I opened it about a finger's width and listened for the dragging. Meow. The sound of a cat almost had me laughing with relief. Of course it was a person. Bella had never once growled at a cat on our porch before, but maybe it was because we were all the way upstairs. I wondered if the sound was Toby. He was an orange tabby that was heavier than all the rest of the strays. He had a few other houses on the street feeding him. The dragging continued. Even Toby didn't seem to be that heavy. For almost 15 minutes something dragged across my porch from one end to the other repetitively. Then it stopped. Completely. Bella stopped growling and went back to sleep, and I waited nervously to call Jake. He thought it was Toby. "You're tired," he told me. "You're up at night watching TV by yourself. Your imagination is running away from you." That didn't explain why Bella was upset, but maybe he was right. For all I knew, there was a stray cat I didn't know yet putzing around on our porch. The next morning, the cat food bowl was toppled over. None of the food inside was eaten. This all leads me to what happened last night, just a few hours ago. Jake was off work Monday. We spent the night enjoying each other's company and watching movies on the couch. Neither of us heard anything strange. I went to work Tuesday morning on basically no sleep at all. I came home to do my usual routine and threw Jake's work uniform to the laundry. While I waited for it to dry, I made the mistake of falling asleep on the couch. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of a cat meowing. Moonlight was streaming through the crack where the curtain didn't fully cover the window by my feet. The television had turned itself off because it was on a set timer. Jake must have gotten ready and left for work without waking me up. Bella lay on the floor beside the couch, and again she was growling. Meow. Meow. Bella growled louder at the sound of it. Her hackles were raised and could tell she was working her way up to a bark. Dragging again. The thing lumbered across the porch and over to the window. I could see the shape of it blocking out the light where the curtain didn't cover. In that moment I was sure of two things. The first was that there was not a cat on my porch at all. The second was that whatever was out there was looking into my living room. Meow. This was a damn near perfect cat impression. If I couldn't see the huge, horrifying human-shaped shadow at my window, I might have even believed it. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I couldn't move. Bella jumped to her feet, ran to the side of the window where the shadow loomed and let out one good ferocious bark. Then she seemed to really see whoever was at the window. She began to tremble and whimper. Meow, the shadow said to her. I was too frightened to move. My dog was whining at my feet, and I could tell if this weirdo on my porch was able to see me laying there or not. After a few moments of silence, a bark resounded through the room. At first I thought Bella had found her voice again, but she was still shaking at my feet. No sound had come from her mouth. The shadow at the window was mimicking her. I could feel tears start to stream down my face. All I could think was a question. Had Jake locked the door before he left for work? I don't know how long I lay there crying in silence and fear, listening to this shadowy person meow and bark. When the sun came up around 5 a.m., the shadow shifted. It seemed to slowly drag itself away from the window and off my porch. It's now 6 a.m. as I write this. Bella and I are still shaking. Jake should be getting off work soon. When he gets here, I'm telling him I want to fucking move. When Jake came home yesterday morning, he asked me why the porch was covered in cat food. I had no idea what he meant, so I nervously opened the front door and looked. The entire bowl was flipped over, and bits of crushed cat food were spread across the entirety of our porch. It looked like someone had dumped the bowl out and proceeded to stomp all the food into dusty bits. The cat food on the back porch was completely untouched. I tried to explain everything that had happened while Jake was gone. I guess the idea of a meowing monster tormenting his wife sat very strangely with him, so he pulled up our Ring camera and tried to review the footage taken around 2 a.m. I was honestly too afraid to watch it. I just waited in silence for him to finish. He definitely looked disturbed by what he saw, but he was clearly not convinced it was a monster. Some teenager must be pulling a fucked up prank on us. He decided. You should move both cat food bowls to the back porch from now on. I argued the idea. What would moving the food do about this dude sitting at our window meowing like a crazy person? I told him I wanted to leave the house altogether. Jake sighed. You know we can't move right now. All of our money is tied up in this place and the lease we signed isn't up for another 6 months. Fuck the lease, I said indignantly. I wanted to feel safe in my living room without someone or something looking into it. We argued for a bit longer than I want to admit before I had to give up. In the end, he was right. We have nowhere else to go so soon. The nearest hotel is a good hour and a half drive from Jake's machinist job. If I wanted to move that badly, he agreed we would look into places and move once our lease was up. In the meantime, he agreed to get new living room curtains and upgrade us to a Ring doorbell instead of the one we have just sitting inside our living room. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful. I went to work and came home with new curtains. I picked a dark brown shade that let in basically no light. It's a terrible choice for a living room, but it would block out any chance of seeing a shadow at night. I got home to find Bella had not touched her food all day. She was curled up in a pile of clothes in our laundry room sleeping. I tried to let her outside to go potty, and she refused to go out until I went out there with her. While we were out, Toby, the orange tabby, stopped by for a bite and rubbed on Bella's leg. She seemed to enjoy his affection until he meowed up at her. Then Bella growled at him. That shocked me and Toby both. Bella never growled at Toby before. She has never growled at any cat. Bella loves cats. I took her inside and she went back to sleep in the laundry room again. I also decided to stop sitting in the living room at night. Before Jake left for work, I gathered everything I would need for food and entertainment before basically locking myself in our room until Jake got home. Bella came with me, of course. I turned the TV up as loud as I could reasonably put it, hoping I would drown out any noise if my night visitor decided to come back. It was once again around 2 a.m. when I heard a faint dragging sound coming from below. Like I'd said before, my bedroom is right above the porch. Bella woke up from her comfortable sleep at my side and started shaking. I turned up the TV and hoped I could just wait it out. I could not. After a few minutes, there was a loud bang. Bella whimpered. I reminded myself of what Jake said. It was just some kid playing a prank. I wasn't sure I believed his idea though. Bang, 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 bang. The noises grew louder. It sounded almost like someone was smacking their hands on the side of my house in frustration. Like the stranger could hear my TV drowning out their intrusion, and it made them angry. I turned the volume louder. Bang, bang. The sound slapped at the old paneling of my house, only getting louder with the TV volume. The force of the hits were shaking my walls. I started to fear this person would try to break into the house if I didn't respond to them. I reluctantly muted my television and crept towards the window. Once again, I only opened it about a finger's width. Go away. I tried to sound braver than I felt. My dog shook behind me so hard it reminded me of how she acted on the 4th of July when fireworks went off. There was an eerie silence that followed my demand. I wondered if I had surprised the person by actually speaking to them. All I did was make things worse. "Go away!" The voice that repeated me from outside almost made me piss my pants. It sounded garbled and wet, like someone was talking with a mouthful of water. "Go away, go away, go away, go away, go away." Each time it repeated my words, it sounded more like my voice, like it was practicing talking like me. The banging started up again. Bang. "Go away," it mocked. Bang, bang, go. Bang, 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 away. A dragging sound. More dragging. The sound dragged its way along the outside of my house back and forth until it stopped directly below my window. I wanted to crawl back to the bed and hide myself under covers like a child. Isn't that always the best way to hide from monsters? Bang, 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 bang. The sound was rapidly climbing its way up to the side of my house, getting louder as it approached. I managed to let go of the window and shove the curtain back in place just before I heard something slap onto glass. I fell back on my ass and stared at the curtain in shock and horror. From the other side of the window, I heard its voice. Meow. I scrambled off on the floor and fucking ran, booking it down the hallway into the bathroom. Bella ran almost ahead of me as I went. I slammed the door behind us and locked it. I didn't care that I left my phone in that bed. All I cared about was that this bathroom had a lock and no fucking windows. Bella and I stayed in that bathroom with the lights on all night long until Jake got home. He wanted to know why I didn't answer when he called me around 3 a.m. on his break. Jake doesn't seem to really believe what I told him. He's treating me like I had some kind of nightmare while he was gone at work. But I know what happened. Something crawled up to the side of my house last night and tried to look in at me. Something that slapped at my windows and spoke in my voice. I wasn't asleep, and it wasn't a dream. I know this for a fact, because in the light of day, I went back into that horrible bedroom and looked at the window. I saw the greasy proof that coated the outside of the glass. There's a handprint on it.
The things that hide in the light are much worse than the ones in the dark. Submitted by Bear in Tuxedo.
There are so many stories and legends of monsters that hide in the dark. It makes sense. You can see in the dark, so there is always some unknown about it. Nothing good ever comes from the dark in movies. There could be an assassin, a trap, or a monster in the dark, and you would never know until it's too late. Darkness is feared by instinct. Light is the opposite of that. It is warm and comforting. It doesn't hide anything and shows you the dangers clearly. Since the cavemen, the light was our protection. The light of the fire has protected us from beasts just as the light of the lighthouse guided boats. Light is to safety what dark is to fear, which is why what is happening to me is so unnerving. The natural source of protection was twisted and corrupted, leaving me to hide in the dark for safety. I started to fear the light when I noticed the things that hide in it. I don't mean dangers hiding in plain sight. I mean an actual creature that is invisible in the light. The problem is that we can barely see in the dark, so it is also difficult to see them even out of the light. It's a difficult concept to explain. The best comparison I found was an experiment with a clear glass ball in water. Some of you might have seen a video about it. If you haven't, it's not difficult to find and pretty interesting. It is clearly visible before the water is added, but adding the water bends the light in a way that makes it disappear. For those creatures, they are hidden in the light in the same way the ball is in the water. The dark reveals them, but the limitations of human eyes still makes it difficult to make out. I think animals might be able to help them somehow. If you ever saw a cat looking in a corner at something you can't see, that might have been it. You might be wondering, you have been in the dark before. How come I never saw one? Well, you might have. You just didn't realize it. If your eyes get used to the dark, you might be able to see them in a passing. You can try to stay in the dark for a while and observe. If there is one in your room, you might catch a glimpse of movement. Human eyes are much better at perceiving moving objects, so that's your best bet. There's no guarantee that you will have one where you are, but you are welcome to try. Maybe you will get lucky. Or unlucky, depending on what you do after. But no matter what you do not touch one. If you only remember one thing from this post, make it this. Never ever touch one. The first time I saw one, I had been staying in my bedroom for a while. I started having very strong migraines and any light was making them worse. My eyes have always been sensitive to light. I rarely go out without sunglasses and I get headaches if I stay in the sun for too long. I got used to staying in my room with the light off and blackout curtains, blocking as much of the light as I could. I usually just listen to music for a few hours until my migraine goes away. Sometimes an audiobook if the pain is not too distracting. If you ever had migraines before, you know how painful it can be. I never had any starting in my dark room, so I grew to feel more safe and comfortable there than in light. I like seeing shapes in my room become clearer and clearer as my eyes get used to the darkness. Even in that familiar room, the shadows make new shapes that make it feel like a new world that only I can see. A world that is now the only place where I feel safe. The first time I saw movement, I didn't mind it that much. I thought my brain was playing tricks in the dark. It's only after seeing it again day after day that I started to realize what it was. It didn't move fast or regularly, but it moved. I wasn't really scared of it, more curious. It didn't feel threatening. The way it moved was soft and smooth. It never moved towards me, always away, but it was always in a different place every time I came back to the room. As days passed, I got closer to it. It made it easier to see what it looked like, even if it still was too dark to see the details. It was the size and shape of a basketball. Not a perfect sphere, but pretty close. I could see some small movement within it, waves moving its surface. It seemed like under its skin was a series of moving rings, pushing against the outer layer to make the whole thing move. There was always at least one ring moving. It looked like a cat purring, feels like. Soft and warm. It was so relaxing, so soothing. So I touched it. I was warm and silky in my hand. The rings agitated a bit and I felt them rub softly against my right hand. I was comforting and soft to the touch. The warmth in my finger made them a bit numb, like when you leave your finger in hot water for a long time. I removed my hand and moved away from the creature. It started to follow me, like a curious animal. I walked around it, playing in a slow chase for a few minutes until I tripped on a chair and I couldn't see in the dark. I tried to grab my desk with my numb hand but couldn't reach it. I was confused about how I couldn't grab it when it was so close. My right hand was still numb and I couldn't really put any strength into it. I reached with my left to massage it and get the blood moving to wake it up. I only found my wrist. I turned on the light to see that my hand was missing entirely. The creature disappeared completely in the light. I couldn't feel my fingers, not because they were numb, but because they were gone. It wasn't painful, it still had a warmth, but as comforting as it felt before, it now terrified me as much as the creature that caused it. I ran out of the room to the kitchen, putting my worm stub under the water, hoping the cold would stop the warmth that was devouring me. It didn't. I went to the garage and found my grandfather's electric saw, made before safeties were a thing, and did the only thing I could think of. Before I lost consciousness, I watched what was left of my severed elbow be consumed by the light. I woke up in the hospital. One of my housemates had heard the commotion and called the emergency right away, which saved my life. There have been cases of self-harm for people with strong migraines like mine, although rarely as extreme as mine. I kept quiet about what happened and encouraged the doctors on their initial judgment. I did everything I could to leave the hospital as soon as possible. When I did, I didn't go home. I went as far as I could. I'm staying with a friend that moved away a few years back. Told him I needed a new start. I'm planning to move to the other side of the world as soon as I can. I'm not sure why, but I am convinced the thing I touched is coming for me. I don't think it means to hurt me. It felt curious, but its intentions don't matter anyway. It would still make me disappear. Maybe that's where the stories of spontaneous combustion come from. Maybe they are why people disappear without trace sometimes. I'm just doing what I think is best to stay safe. I know that the one I touched is looking for me. Not with malice, with curiosity. But the result if it finds me would be the same. I stay in the dark as much as I can now. At least that way I might see it coming. I might have a chance to escape. I feel uncomfortable in the light now. There is no way to see what is hiding out there. No way to know if it's coming for me. I've seen others since. They are not everywhere, but they are not rare. I'd say around a quarter of the rooms I stayed in had one. No way to know how much of them are outside. From what I can tell, they try to stay away from us. They stay on the ceiling most of the time. Should probably be fine even if you manage to see one. Just don't make the mistake of touching one like I did. I made a mistake and I beg you to learn from it. You know what hides in the light now. I hope that it doesn't take a liking to you. So yeah guys, hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, leave a like, maybe even subscribe to show your support. And by the way, if you have an interesting story like this, make sure to leave it down in the comments, and if it's interesting enough, I'll even feature it in a future video. So have a good one. Peace.